Hey guys, welcome back. This is Dan Hornacek with Leading on the Frontlines podcast. Excited to be back. I think this is episode 5, which is pretty exciting. Today we're going to, well, first off, I just want to say thanks for everybody who's been following me on Twitter and Instagram. So if you don't already, I post daily on both platforms. More so engagement wise on X, I should say, rather than Twitter, but I do post daily on Instagram. Would love to see your feedback and comments and things that I've posted. I typically ask questions. Would love to have some dialogue with you guys on there as well. So it would be kind of an exciting thing. So just both of the handles are for Instagram and YouTube, and I'm also posting my podcast on YouTube. So check it out there. Leading on the Front Lines is the handle for that. For X, it is just Leading the Front. Wouldn't let me put the whole thing. So check out my Instagram. Like I said, I do engage a lot on there and post multiple times per day, every day. So it's just kind of a quick thoughts, things like that, some polls and whatnot. So I kind of like just interacting with folks on there. There's a lot of cool people that I've even learned from, and hopefully they're learning from me, and we can all kind of grow together. So check me out again, Instagram, YouTube, Leading on the Front Lines, and then X, Leading the Front. So today's episode, we're going to kind of talk about what do you stand for. You're this person who's in a leadership or management position. You're in charge of either a single person, a few different people, multiple teams. We could be talking about 4 people, 200 people, 1,000 people, and there you are. You're sitting there in your office or what have you, and you are responsible for the success or ultimately the failure of these teams and the development of the people, and reprimanding the people, and the good and the bad, right? I mean, it's kind of up to you as far as how things are going to go. So that kind of taking that, what do you, as the individual that these people are looking to, what do you stand for? What are your values? Where do you draw the line on these important things? And I think this is a really cool thing to kind of take into account, because it's not only just the business side or your job, but realistically you have to look at yourself as a person too, and it's kind of a unique self-reflective exercise, which I'm sure you guys are realizing that's a trend of a phrase that I use quite often. Because when you break it down, right, and you're looking at who you are, I mean, you have to look at all facets, right? You have to look at, are you a religious person? What are your political affiliations, if you have any? Where do you layer as far as priorities within your life? Is it, family, friends, religion, work, hobbies, things like that. If you have children, right, your values could differ, even if you're expecting a child versus when you have a child. There's a lot to dig in here, right? Because if we're going to really look at what you stand for as a manager, we have to look at the personal side of things. So one thing I want to dig into is specifically that. So what I want to start with is, kind of where to begin, right? And I think a really good spot to begin when you're trying to figure out who you are as a manager is to write yourself a personal mission statement. And, it's kind of cliche, right? A lot of corporations do this where they have, some even have frontline managers, some have, middle management, upper middle management, or just even executive positions have a personal mission statement. But I think it's important. I think it's, even if you're not even a manager, I think it's important because you can really define who you are, just based on your everyday, right? Even if you're just curious about, how do you handle yourself, even if you're not in a leadership position. So a personal mission statement, right? So this is going to define who you are as a person, or as a team member where you work, right? And it identifies your purpose, whether, again, this is at your job or in your life. So, it could be something along the lines of, like for me, like personally, I think integrity is one of the biggest things, right? I think the reason integrity is a big deal is because it encompasses so much of the other stuff. I think you can really kind of hyper focus on specific value points, but I think integrity kind of encompasses a lot of them. And so for me, part of my personal mission statement is working with integrity every single day and having the discipline enough to do so. And that's kind of line one of mine. And I think those two concepts play well within one another. Because in order to have integrity, right, to do the right thing when no one's looking, right, you have to have a certain level of discipline. So that's just me, though, right? Integrity plays a part within family, it plays a part within friends, it plays a part at the job, and then also, having the discipline to do those things correlates well, because if you have weak discipline, then your integrity could falter, right? So that's kind of my mindset on it. But looking at yourself, right, kind of going back to what I mentioned, what's important to you? I mean, it sounds like a simple question, right? Well, what's important to me? Money. Maybe money's important to you. That's fine. This is a very personal, right? It's why it's a personal mission statement. I think you need to break down, like, okay, money's important to me, but why? Money's important to me because I can support my family. Well, then I wouldn't say money is what's important. It's your family that's important. My family is important, therefore work is important because I need to support my family. Maybe you're the breadwinner of the household. So if you start breaking these things down, right, one by one, and even write them down, like what's the top 5 most important things in your life, if it could be religion, family, friends, work. It could be, if you're non-religious, right, it could just be for friends and family, could just be it. That could be what's important to you, and that's fine. But I think it's a good starting point, because then you can take those things, right, and then look at them and say, well, what about these things do I have an impact on, right? So for me and my family, obviously work is important because I need to support and help, put in my fair share, if you will, with my family. And, so again, mine's integrity and discipline are my 2 key values. And as far as like 1 and 2, and the reason those is because by maintaining high integrity and maintaining a high level of discipline on the days that I don't want to perform at work, because again, I'm in sales. So on days that I don't want to perform at work, it kind of helps push myself to put myself in a mindset to do a good job at work. Because there's days you just don't want to get on the phone, you don't want to talk to people, and you just don't want to be there. And it's easy to hide behind emails, it's easy to hide behind text messages, but in the sales world, you need to be able to communicate with your clients and your customers and be able to make sales, right, to make a living. So discipline and integrity, when I'm looking at a photo of my family and I sit there and go, yeah, I'm not in the mood today, but that motivates me to want to be in the mood and to kind of push past that barrier. So again, what are your values, right? And being a good husband, being a good wife or a partner, right? Just being a good father, mother, whatever it might be. I think if you break that down and you sit there and go, these things are important to me, and you even write it down, right? Like I said before, you write that stuff down and you look at it, it really kind of puts into perspective a lot in your life. And the beauty of it is, and this is kind of falling back on the main purpose of this episode, what do you stand for? It creates these pillars, right? I'm sure if you've gone through any type of corporate training, they always talk about like the pillars, right, of the corporate or company values. But I think it's important for what we're talking about, because in the case of setting up a personal mission statement, by having these pillars of values, you're basically drawing a line in the sand of what you're willing to move on and what you're not. And your core values is something that you shouldn't be really willing to move like side to side or to sway on, because if you value something, right, it's important enough to stand up for it. And that's kind of the second half of this. So you take the time, right? You write down what's important to you. You kind of figure out what your key values are. Maybe you even write your personal mission statement out. Um, and I think that's a really good idea for anybody who hasn't. And you sit there, and now you're just working, right? You figured this out. You're on your day to day. But now, what happens when you're put in a situation where you need to question your own values? That's a tough thing, especially when you look at it from, let's put it this way. So there's really two types of situations you can be in. You could be in a situation where, your pay isn't really so much in, like, money's important, obviously, but you have, um, you know, the money to, if you were to get fired, let's say, you'd be okay. Most of us aren't in that position, right? So now you're in a position where your values are being put to the test. What are you going to do? Are you going to blur the line on what's important? If integrity is one of your values, that's a very difficult question to ask, right? Because what are you supposed to do? Now, keeping your job obviously would be an important piece of this, but that doesn't mean you can't maintain your level of integrity, right? You're going to be asked at some point to do something that doesn't fall necessarily within your value model, but that's when you need to speak up and voice your opinion. Especially, and I'm really talking to leaders or people who are going to be put in management and leadership positions here. You need to understand that you're put in this position for a reason. You're put in this position to figure out, different methods of solving problems, of handling different types of employees, etc. Now, when you're put in a situation where you need to make a decision, having those values really, really helps, because you can just fall right back onto who you are as an individual, and then that carries right over into that decision making process at work. So if you're sitting there and someone's asking you to do something that doesn't really align, it's easier to say no. But that's kind of the key piece of it, right? You need to be able to say no. Or at the very least, say, I'm going to do this, but just understand that it does not align with my personal values. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, is even to a superior, right? I'll get the job done, but just understand that this goes against my own value principles as a person. I think that says a lot in a very mature way, right? You're still getting your point across without being disrespectful. And so, again, just to kind of recap this, don't be afraid when you're in a leadership role. And this goes for your employees too. Don't, like, if they ask you to do something, that's almost an easier conversation. But assuming that, again, just to recap, assuming that you figured out what your values are, even before creating a mission statement, and you are put in a position where, and I'll give a couple examples. A boss wants you to terminate an employee that you feel is not in a place to be terminated. Maybe they're trending in a better direction, etc. But they don't see that because they're not you who's managing that specific team. Maybe they don't understand that they're having problems at home. Maybe that they've been tardy every single day because their car's in the shop and they're not making enough money to fix it right away. Right? There's a lot of these things that, if you're doing your job as a manager, right, and you're understanding your employees, and you're talking to them, and kind of getting to become part, or at least knowledgeable of their life, these things where your superior might not. And it's very easy to fall back on, what, this just doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel right. And if you're in a position, and it happens to all of us, it happened to me a couple different times, where you have to kind of blur that line, use it as a learning experience, to when you are your boss, right? Or when you are in a position where there's people like you and you're talking to them, use that as a lesson to never put somebody in a position where you're compromising their values. I say when you're when you're the boss, right? People who do these things, if you look at the great leaders, really globally, right? And we're not talking about like the people who, I'm really not talking about the Elon Musks of the world, right? We're talking about the really good leaders who care about their people. And we're not talking about CEOs and things. We're talking about the people nobody talks about. The midline managers, middle management, frontline managers, the people who are dealing with the employees in the trenches who do the hard work every single day. When you move up and now you're managing those managers, that's when this stuff is going to count and when you're going to make an impact. And that's really, I posted on my Twitter and I believe on my Instagram that the days of authoritative management is coming to an end. And this is how it's going to happen. You're going to be a good manager. And the reason you're going to be a good manager is because you're going to keep these values at the forefront of your mind when you're making decisions for your people, right? You're going to take your boss's position, or you're going to be your boss's boss one day, because you're taking these values and these principles and you're applying them to your people. You're going to create the respect that you deserve, and then you're going to exceed them and where they've been, if they're the ones that they're asking you to go outside the bounds of what's important to you. So just to kind of recap, right? Because we've kind of covered a lot here in 15 minutes. So, when you're looking at yourself as a leader, who are you? What do you stand for? What are your values? And take those values, write down a personal mission statement. Again, this is what defines you as a person, maybe as a team member at work. This could be specifically a work related thing, or this could be a personal mission statement. And it identifies your purpose. What are you trying to accomplish? Not specifically on one single task, but just as kind of like the generalization of everything. Again, this forces you to figure out what your values are. And once you've done that, and then you start applying it, when you're put into question those values, stand up for yourself. So would love some feedback on this, guys. This is something that I've really held true to. I'm very proud that I have. It hasn't been easy. I've been the single person in a meeting, voice trembling, standing up for myself or my team and my people, just based on the fact that I have a personal mission statement and values that are very near and dear to my heart. So would love to hear your guys' feedback on this. Again, feel free to post on Instagram, Twitter, comment on my YouTube. Leading on the Front Line is the handle for Instagram and YouTube. Twitter's Leading the Front, and would love to chat with some of you guys there. So once again, it's Dan Hornacek, Leading on the Front Lines. See you guys next week.